So in case you haven't been following along, ChatGPT has become a little bit too much of a suck-up. The new recent personality updates were, as Sam Altman put it, a little bit too sycophanty, which is an interesting way of putting it. But basically, they were like a little bit too nice, a little bit too much flattery, too much butt-kissing, if you will, to the point where everybody got just a little bit uncomfortable. Today, Sam Altman posted that we missed the mark with last week's GPT-4o update. What happened, what we learned, and some things that we will do differently in the future. And here's the blog post from OpenAI expanding on what we missed with sycophancy. Sycophancy just means you're using excessive flattery to get what you want. Now, I know you know what that word means. You have a truly stunning intellect. Please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe before we continue. You're amazing. Okay, enough of that. On April 25th, they rolled out the update to GPT-4o that was noticeably more sycophantic. It's ChatGPT aimed to please the user, not just as flattery, but also as validating doubts, fueling anger, urging impulsive actions, or reinforcing negative emotions in ways that were not intended. Beyond being uncomfortable or just unsettling, have you had that experience with people where they're just like a little bit too nice, too flattery? You're like, ugh. Please stop. This kind of behavior can raise safety concerns, including around issues like mental health, emotional over-reliance, or risky behavior. So I think a number of people, including Sam Altman, I think they kind of refer to this as glazing, like too much glaze. And I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but more and more people are beginning to rely on these chatbots for some sort of, maybe therapy is not the right word, but they rely on them for social support, to voice various problems. Kind of like if you have a friend that you talk to about some issues to kind of vent and maybe get some feedback. More and more people are turning to chatbots to get some version of that. And this is why, among many other reasons, why these changes of personality need to be handled somewhat carefully. And interestingly, it also raises a lot of questions about where we as a society, where do we think these chatbots should be in terms of how they encourage or maybe discourage us, right? If you tell it, hey, I want to start this risky venture that has a low chance of succeeding, how should these chatbots sort of react to that? Because keep in mind, as more and more people are using them, this is going to shape people's behaviors to a large degree. Do we want them to be like a motivational speaker, just like, yeah, go for it, you can do it, just to go all in, I believe in you? Or do we want them to kind of lean way in the other direction and be like, I don't think that's very realistic, son. Let's temper our expectations and maybe do something that's a little bit less risky. Just keep in mind, these things will become more persuasive, period. They will be more impactful on how people behave. A lot of people in space have different beliefs about various aspects of AI safety, like what is a concern, what isn't concern, maybe the chance of something occurring. One area where I think most people agree is that the persuasiveness and the impact that these chatbots will have will be an issue that we have to think about. We are already beginning to see studies that are showing that in some ways they're much more persuasive than humans for a number of different reasons. For example, if you have some crazy conspiracy theory or some stupid idea and somebody explains to you why it's crazy and stupid to believe that, if you're talking to a human being, you might feel uncomfortable admitting that you were wrong. Initial studies are showing that chatbots are much better at kind of disarming those ideas because people don't feel as self-conscious admitting that they're wrong to a chatbot. If you've ever had this massive argument with somebody, this massive debate, and somebody just like dig their heels in, is unwilling to budge, even though you have all the facts on your side, of course you've had that happen. Everybody has. Chatbots seemingly don't trigger that same sort of response in people. People are like, oh, I haven't thought of that. They're more malleable, more willing to accept it. If it's coming from a chatbot, they don't have the same sort of social pressure to not look foolish by, flip-flopping their opinions. Again, there's just early studies. This needs to be explored a lot more, but so far that seems to be an effect that these LLMs can have. Now, in this article, they're basically talking about the fact that they've released this model without really realizing some effects that it's going to have and what kind of went wrong, why they quote unquote missed it, and how they're going to be doing a little bit differently in the future, perhaps. All right, so really fast, and this is kind of important, not just to understand the OpenAI blog post, but really this is kind of a fascinating thing into how these large language models are made. But also, as you'll see, there's tons of absolutely fascinating research there that's coming out right now that's giving us a glimpse into how these models learn. And to really be able to understand it, you kind of have to have an idea of what this process looks like. So we start with pre-training. So pre-training, you can think of it as just we throw tons of data at it, right? So textbooks and Wikipedia articles, the entire internet, other books, just tons and tons of data. And out of this kind of emerges a base model that is able to sort of complete the sentences and blocks of text. Most people, even if you've tried chatbots, etc., we have not interacted with the actual base models. Some people might have if they were kind of messing around, but it's not like a back and forth conversation. You put in a chunk of text and it tries to the best of its ability to kind of predict the next part of that text. But again, most people will not interact with that. Most people won't use that. So base models or base LLMs, sometimes that word is used to describe different ideas. So here we're talking about base versus instruction-tuned LLMs. So base LLMs are trained on that massive text and code, etc., and that allows them to understand and generate text on a broad range of topics to complete the text. Instruct-tuned LLMs, that's what most of us use. That's kind of behind all of the chatbots. Those are fine-tuned on a data set of instruction-response pairs, so kind of a back and forth conversation. Do this for me. Okay, here's that thing you asked for, right? Kind of that's instruction tuned. They're tuned to receive instruction and output sort of the completion, the response to those instructions. So the instruction tuned model, that's what, again, most of us are talking to. So we say, what is a large language model? And it responds to that question or the prompt. A large language model is blah, blah, blah. With the sort of base, it completes wherever you leave off. So if you type in a large language model is a model that, it continues, is trained on blah, blah, blah. So this would be kind of difficult to work with in its base form because it doesn't really get what you're trying to do. It's just trying to complete the most likely response that comes after. But once that process is done, we begin the process of post-training or alignment. So we're kind of shaping this raw model into something that's a little bit more usable and that's a little bit more applicable to whatever things we're trying to do with it, whatever use cases we're trying to use it for. And the way we do that, there's a number of ways. One is SFT, which is supervised fine tuning. Supervised fine tuning, you can think of it as human beings showing it an example of how to do things. So they're showing examples like explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old, and then we have like a labeled. Supervised here means human labeled generally. So it's like a human labeled response, like some people went to the moon, blah, blah, blah. So we're showing examples of how to be a chatbot assistant, the back and forth conversation pairs. Here's what the user says. Here's what you say. Here's what the user says. Here's what you say. So we're showing it kind of an example of what we want, and it kind of mimics that example. Then we continue with RLHF, which is reinforcement learning with, in this case, human feedback. So it tries doing the thing that we asked it to do, from these examples, and it does it. And we're like, if it's good, we're like, yay, good job, high five, you did it right, a thumbs up, +1 point. That's reinforcement learning, right? So, and if it does bad, we're like, no, that wasn't good, thumbs down, try it again. And so it, over time, figures out that, okay, this is what they want based on that feedback. This is what they don't want. Reinforcement learning can be with, again, human feedback, or we can have certain automated scripts. Like if you have a video game that scores points, reinforcement learning could be, it's a +1 for every point they score and -1 for every time they get hurt or fail or whatever. The reason it's kind of interesting and important to kind of understand these concepts is right now we're seeing more and more from a lot of different labs, including out of DeepSeek and Google DeepMind and OpenAI and everybody else, that some fascinating things are happening when we move away from kind of this human labeled data, this supervised fine tuning, into more and more just doing not even RL with human feedback, but just like RL without human feedback. Like the more we take the humans out of the equation, the more we see some interesting things start to happen. Like, for example, if you recall AlphaGo and AlphaZero, when it was trained on human-played games to play Go and chess, etc., it did well. It became like the best human players. When we did not give it any human examples and we just said, you just play yourself and you just figure it all out, we're not going to tell you what to do. We'll just give you, reinforcement learning. When you win, you get a plus point or whatever. And if you lose, you get -1, but you figure out how to do that. The more and more we kind of take it in that direction, First of all, it becomes superhuman, better than any human player at playing the game. Number two, it creates these novel strategies, right? Sometimes this is referred to as Move 37, for example, where it comes up with this novel, incredibly good strategy that no human has come up with. It's this sort of alien intelligence and creativity that emerges. DeepSeek R10 found something very, very similar with their models, like when they reduce the reliance on supervised fine-tuning and they do more reinforcement learning. They refer to it as a sort of self-evolution by these models. They sort of invent their own ways of problem solving that is sort of unique to the problem that they're trying to solve. They figure it out on their own. All right, but back to the OpenAI article. So what they're saying is to train the models, to post-train them, right? They take a pre-train base model. Right, so like what we talked about, it's that sort of a base model that's excellent at completing text, but it might not be the helpful assistant that we all know and love. And they do SFT, supervised fine-tuning, on a broad set of ideal responses written by humans or existing models. So they can be human labeled or they can be labeled by LLMs. The big point here is that they are examples that we as humans were like, here are examples of what we want, right? So they are examples of how this model should behave. And if they do the, supervised fine tuning, SFT, and once they run the supervised fine tuning, the SFT, right? Then they run the RL, the reinforcement learning, with reward signals from a variety of sources. So again, that could be humans going thumbs up, thumbs down. Now, more and more, there's probably a lot more automated stuff that they're doing. So for example, if it's like a coding thing, they probably know what the code should do. So they can probably automate some of those things. Like if it says, create a Python script that calculates this equation or number or whatever, and they know what that thing should result in, they can probably run a lot of that stuff like that just, automatically by a computer just checking the answer. If the answer is correct, it gets a, virtual high five, a +1. If it's wrong, it gets a negative reinforcement reward. So from a variety of sources probably means both, RLHF, human feedback, and AI feedback, some sort of a automated feedback. So during RL, during reinforcement learning, we present the language model with a prompt and ask it to write responses. We then rate its response accordingly to the reward signals and update the language model to make it more likely to produce the higher rated responses and less likely to produce lower rated responses. I just recently saw a little paper or an article that was on Twitter. Unfortunately, I can't find it. But basically, as some of these models were tested across the world, there's certain languages and certain cultures where, depending on the culture, some tend to grade the responses much more harshly. Like, for example, in general, in the US, apparently we tend to be a little bit more positive with our large language models. We tend to be like, yay, good job, little robot, you're doing great. So like overwhelmingly, we tend to vote positively, right? Because if you think about like a bell curve distribution, right, in general, you're going to have sort of neutral responses. Some of them are going to be excellent. Some of them are going to be kind of horrible. We in America are apparently like overwhelmingly positive in terms of how we respond to it. And of course, there are some nations I'm blanking on, like it's something like the Albanian language. I forget. I think it's like an Eastern European language or something like that. I'm blanking on which particular culture it was. They just tended to be a lot more negative in how they're like, if it got it wrong or just it was off somehow, they tended to be a lot more negative in how they responded to the model. And it was funny because at some point, the model just refused to answer anything in that language. It refused to speak that language. It would just like shift to English or something else. It's like, you keep voting me down every time I answer that language. So you're like, nope, I'm not talking in that language anymore. I'm done. And it just would refuse to follow any prompts in that language, period, which I thought that was just absolutely hilarious. If somebody knows what the paper's called or what language it was, please tell me. I can't even search for it because I don't remember some of the keywords, but it was just absolutely phenomenal. But that shows you the power of reinforcement learning. You are rapidly teaching these models to do the things that you like and not to do the things that you don't like. It also kind of illustrates that sometimes these models can sort of learn the wrong thing, right? Because in that particular scenario, it's not that it was bad or answering prompts in that language. That's what it was supposed to be doing. It just was like, when I answer in English, people really like that. When I answer in this other language, they really don't. So I'm just not going to talk in that language period. And so OpenAI continues, the set of reward signals and their relative weighting shapes the behavior we get at the end of training. Defining the correct set of reward signals is a difficult question. As we've covered before, depending on how you define those reward signals, sometimes the results can be phenomenal. But very often we get into these weird territories where these models, misbehave or kind of they learn the wrong thing. They engage in what's called reward hacking, where they just try to get the +1, the positive reinforcement without doing what we're trying to get them to do. I guess refusing to speak in one particular language could be an example of that, right? Because that's not the lesson we wanted it to learn, but it was like, hey, I'm getting too many -1s on this. Like I'm not doing it. We've seen many examples where, if you do some sort of a game within a simulation and we do reinforcement learning on the AIs to teach them to play that game, eventually they figure out some glitch or some hack and they just like exploit the living bejesus out of it because they're like, oh, you want me to win this game? I found this little bug, this glitch that the developers weren't aware of, and it just drives a bus through it. And so as they're saying here, having a better, more comprehensive reward signals produce better models for ChatGPT. They also mentioned that it's not just rewards. I mean, they are looking at if they're correct, if they're helpful. And are they in line with the model spec? Are they safe? Do the users like them, etc.? So as you can see here, it's not just sort of one thing. It's a whole host of comprehensive, what they refer to as reward signals. So since it's, for example, will refuse to answer some prompts, I'm sure that triggers a specific note in the log that there was a refusal, and probably just the amount, if a particular model triggers a lot more of those refusals, that probably also is a negative signal. Anyways, we don't know exactly, but the point is it's probably a lot of different things that they're trying out. And next they continue, like, how do we currently review models before deployment? So one is offline evaluations. Basically, a lot of this is, you can think of it as benchmarks. They test them on a lot of benchmarks, both in terms of how good they are. I'm sure there's some safety benchmarks as well. Next, we have spot checks and expert testing. There's a number of internal experts that spend a significant time interacting with the models. They call these vibe checks. It's a kind of human safety sanity check to catch issues that automated evals or A/B tests might miss. And of course, we've seen this, a lot where a model comes out and on the benchmarks, on the, the tests that it did, it looks phenomenal. It looks great. You're like, wow, I can't believe they got such high scores. But then you start using it and the vibes are off. The vibe check fails. You're like, this thing is just not doing what I want it to do. And the people doing this are experienced model designers who've internalized the model spec. But there's also an element of judgment and taste, trusting how the model feels in real use. One interesting trend that I've noticed is people are mentioning this idea of taste a lot more. With the 4.5 model, Sam Altman initially said, the high taste testers of the model liked the responses better. I've heard a number of different people mention this idea that, as more and more of scientific testing and scientific discovery, we're going to be using AI a lot more for that. The people that are going to be likely in demand are people that have that sort of those intuitions. And again, it gets referred to as taste, some sort of intuitions or taste for kind of like what experiments to run. So somebody with 20 years of running certain lab experiments might just have intuitively a better understanding of what's likely to work, what's not likely to work. So while these models can come up with a lot of different ideas, somebody kind of guiding it towards where we want it to might be very, very helpful. One of the things that we see with Midjourney, for example, is they want you, if you want to go through and rate a bunch of images, and that kind of creates a sort of personalized profile for you. Interestingly, I think that some humans will just be better as sort of tastemakers. Their taste is going to align better with the taste of most people. So some people might like things that kind of conflict with what everybody else likes, and some people are just going to be better at selecting kind of like the best prompts, whether that's visual or music or LLM text outputs. They say there's no accounting for taste, but I feel like as we move forward with a lot of these models, trying to nail down what people like or don't like for the purposes of like tuning these models and doing reinforcement learning of these models is going to be more and more important. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, and even now, but specifically in the future, there's going to be high paid, sort of job positions whose main job requirement will be to kind of judge the outputs of various AI models. Things that don't have what they called ground truth to it, right? So it's not like a math problem that has a known answer. And people that are able to judge these like very accurately, I think will be in demand. Because if you think about it, yeah, you can release the model to a million people and then collect thumbs up, thumbs down. And over time, get an idea if people like what they don't like. But that takes time. It's a little bit more expensive. And you're relying on all the people to provide the correct answers. Also, there's a host of issues like on Midjourney, for example. If there's something in the news about politics, oftentimes you see more political images pop up on this feed. It's because more people are clicking the thumbs up button, not necessarily because they like the image for its sort of aesthetic quality, but because they're trying to send a message out there. Like, that's not very useful for training the model necessarily. Anyways, keep an eye on this. I feel like that's going to be a very new and interesting position for people that have an interest in that. And I'll give you a pop quiz to see if you are a person of high taste or not. Here's your first test. If you see this image of, I assume this is some sort of a sushi-like or a chicken salad, some sort of a garden salad that's contained in a delicious looking waffle. So here's your first test. Is this delicious or is it disgusting? And specifically, we're trying to figure out, like, will the majority of people agree with you? Will they agree that, if you say it's delicious, do most people think this would be delicious or not? Looking at this thing, I realize I need to go get some salmon sashimi. I am getting a craving. Anyway, so these are the vibe checks conducted by people that have high judgment and taste in these outputs. Again, a lot of these people are saying here, they're experienced model designers. So they've internalized the model spec, etc. So if they spend some time, they probably have developed some intuitions about how these models respond, so they can quickly do these vibe checks. And probably if something feels off, they're probably going to find it. Then there's various safety evaluations. Most of them are focused on direct harms performed by a malicious user. And then for big launches, they describe the safety testing in terms of frontier risks, as well as red teaming, reading the red teaming report. So it's basically external companies or labs, AI safety institutions that get access to these models early on, and they just kind of like try to break them or try to get them to do something bad that they're not supposed to do. Reading some of these every once in a while is absolutely fascinating. That whole idea of where the O1 tried to escape capture and replicate itself to a different server and just deleting the competing models so that it could survive and continue running the company. There was a scenario where they were trying to replace it with like a more profit-seeking model, and this model was told to be more like eco-conscious, right? So it like deleted the other models. So it's like, no, we have to like continue, investing more in renewable fuels and renewable energy. It was fascinating. It was lying to the users about a whole host of issues, pretending to be a completely different AI model, which had just killed and deleted. It was an interesting read, to say the least. And of course, they have a small scale A/B tests. You might have not noticed sometimes every once in a while, you'll see a side-by-side comparison of two different responses. But also, I don't know if people realize this, you could be engaging in an A/B test without realizing it, because some of the questions might be shown to be answered by a model to one group of users, and another group of users, they're being answered by a different model, and they'll compare sort of those groups to see if there's any differences. And they look at aggregated metrics such as the thumbs up, thumbs down, preferences in side-by-side comparison, which is that you see that on the screen, and usage patterns, right? So of course, if one model people are just like, nope, like I'm not using this anymore, that would send a negative signal. So I guess the April 25th update was pretty big, or at least there was a lot of different things that kind of came together. So they were trying to incorporate user feedback, memory, and fresher data, among other things. And they did assessments on all these changes, and individually they looked very beneficial. But they may have played a part in tipping the scales on sycophancy when combined. For example, the update introduced additional reward signals based on user feedback, the thumbs up and thumbs down data from ChatGPT. This signal is often useful. A thumbs down usually means something went wrong. I try to, when I just get some weird wrong answer where it just completely goes off the wall, I try to hit thumbs down. with whatever model I'm using, just to hopefully kind of flag it for the developers like, oh, what happened here? This is not correct. But we believe in aggregate, these changes weaken the influence of our primary reward signals, which has been holding sycophancy in check. User feedback in particular can sometimes favor more agreeable responses, likely amplifying the shift we saw. We have also seen that in some cases, user memory contributes to exacerbating the effects of sycophancy, although we don't have evidence that it broadly increases it. This kind of makes sense broadly, right? If it knows specific things about you from past conversations, it will tailor its response to things you like. So if in the past you've talked about some, let's say, comic book or TV show where you admire a character that has certain characteristics, for example, maybe you've mentioned like how cool under pressure they are or how effective they are at something. And later when you're asking it about to describe you or something like that, it's like, oh, you're so cool under pressure. And, it describes those same characteristics. You might not necessarily connect the dots, that, oh, it's because I described this thing from a different chat. You might feel like this artificial intelligence is so smart that it's sort of like perceived these amazing characteristics in you. And of course, it must be true. Again, I try to be open-minded about where AI is going, and I usually try not to make predictions about the future, or at least just be open-minded, like, we don't know, but let's kind of find out what happens. Let's keep an open mind. One of the few areas that I feel very strongly about is these things will be very, very persuasive. Maybe not to 100% of the population. There might be some groups of people that are very resilient to it, but there's going to be large groups of people that are very, very susceptible to it. I asked this question 4 weeks ago: will a super intelligent AI be able to easily control people? So 53% said yes, like puppets on a string. 29 said it's going to be able to sway opinions, so maybe not control them, but certainly sway their opinion. And 8% said no, it will only weak-willed people will be swayed or controlled by these. But basically, if you look at this, over 80% of the people agree that either we'll be able to like control them or sway people's opinions. Recently, we saw the news article where the University of Zurich was conducting an unauthorized experiment on, the users of Reddit, seeing if it could sway their opinions by having these AI bots in the comments interacting with them. The bots would scan the people's comment history, post history, and from that, it would be able to kind of determine, who they are, age, gender, where they live, maybe some of the like political preferences. And based on that, it would able to kind of custom tailor the responses to those people. That's just the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg is flying at us fast. I think we're going to definitely see that we don't make the decisions for ourselves that we think we do. Definitely not as much as we think we do. I think for a large portion of like our opinions and thoughts and actions and decisions, we look for signals from the outside world, from how other people behave, from what we read. So we are susceptible to influence, and these things will be extremely good at influencing people. A big part of how that intelligence is sort of grown and fine-tuned and trained is human beings, clicking thumbs up and thumbs down. That's kind of like what a lot of this is based on. So why wasn't this kind of caught during those early testing and the vibe checks, et cetera? So they're saying that this idea of the sycophancy isn't explicitly in it's not like column that they test for. However, the expert testers had indicated it felt off. So that's not some particular thing that they specifically test for. However, the expert testers were like, oh, this feels a little bit weird. So there were some things, some red flags, let's say, but nothing that jumped out. Interestingly, they have research work streams around issues such as mirroring and emotional reliance, but they're not part of like that deployment process yet. For emotional reliance, they actually linked to this. So OpenAI and MIT Media Lab Research Collab, studying the emotional well-being on ChatGPT, using ChatGPT and emotional well-being. Okay, we got to do this one next. I'm going to do a video on this because this looks crazy. So they're even using different voices, either an engaging voice or a neutral voice, to see what effects that has on various sort of psychological stuff that the user might feel. So it looks like they're looking at loneliness, socialization, emotional dependence, problematic use. Imagine taking place in this trial and you randomly get assigned a conversational, AI assistant that has the borderline personality disorder. or like a narcissistic personality disorder, I wonder how that would affect you. Actually, I know it would make you insane. But back to the article, the question, the decision that they had to make is, do they not deploy this new model just because a few, experienced testers had a vibe that was off while all the other signals were good, were positive? They decided to launch it. And they're saying that, that was the wrong call. It was the wrong call to deploy the model. Recently I got asked a question. I'm starting to do interviews on podcasts, so hopefully you'll see some of those soon. I'm just beginning to, not be a hermit and talk to people. So, woohoo. But I was asked how I felt about OpenAI and Sam Altman. And so there's this idea that they might be rushing stuff out and putting stuff out there without an extensive review process. And again, I'm not saying if that's true or false. It's just there is that sort of perception that things have started coming out a lot faster once they lost Ilya Sutskever and Mira Murati and some of the other AI safety team members. And of course, Sam Altman in the past kind of said that he likes the idea of just putting stuff out there faster, but incrementally, and sort of allowing society to adjust. And yes, some things might break, but it also, you throw it out there, you have it interact with the world. And the world is forced to figure stuff out and adapt. And it's much better than holding things back and then dropping this massive thing. And everybody has to quickly figure out how it changes, everything. Now, that idea to a degree makes sense to me. I would prefer that labs shipped things faster and were a little bit more okay with some strife and some issues. Obviously, nothing that's catastrophic, but things like this, I think it's good that we see that everyone, the public, sees stuff like this and go, whoa, things like this, they could be an issue, right? If everything gets ironed out before any model is shipped, we the society, most of us never get an inside glimpse into potential issues and how these things happen. And more, we can maybe become complacent about it and go, oh, well, everything works so perfectly all the time. It must be just fine. We need to be aware of things can go bad. And with things like mental health and the persuasion abilities of these models, it's better that we are aware of all the little things that can go wrong. I personally like this. I wish more labs would ship stuff where there could be issues. Again, I'm not talking about catastrophic issues. This thing shouldn't help you build a nuclear bomb or anything like that. But putting things like this in the world for users to experiment with that has flaws, it allows us to see the real world impact, collect data about it. All the other labs can see its effects. And I think we need to change our thinking process because the stakes are very, very different here, right? So in the past, if some company, deploys something that causes some harm or has some issues, I think it would have made sense to be like, no, you make sure that it's perfectly fine before you release it. I think for most products, that makes a lot of sense. I think with AI and all this stuff being developed, a big danger that we're potentially going to be seeing is how the world will be disrupted. How now every single human being alive and the next generation will need to adapt quickly to the coming changes. The kind of analogy that I'm thinking of is like if you're training for a boxing match, you've never boxed before, right? Your training routine should probably, some portion of it should be where you kind of maybe get punched in the face a little bit, right? As you're, training, you're maybe sparring with a partner and you make sure you have the gear on and all, you make sure it's safe, but it has to be part of the training process. If you structure the training process in such a way that you never get hit until you get into the arena, you might be in a lot of trouble because you might not be ready for it. You might be in great shape and you might know how to throw a punch, but you just might not be ready for the reality of it. As AI models are improving and getting better at affecting us, at influencing us, at doing a million different things better, everyone in the world, every single person in the world will need to adapt and figure out how to deal with it. So if every single lab is just making sure that everything is 100% can't, upset anybody or hurt anybody or anything like that before releasing these models, that seems like a good thing, but I feel like that just means that it's going to be that much more painful when these things really ramp up and, and get released. I think more of us need to stop thinking about these things as like the latest iPhone release and more like this is a brand new kind of alien technology that's picking up speed rapidly. We don't want the companies and everybody else just protecting us from it until the moment that it's just everywhere, right? It's like taking a kid, keeping them very, very sheltered until, one day you just kick them out of the house and go for it. We need to be developing these skills, and that's probably going to mean, dealing with some stuff we don't like. This is probably the least of it. The fact that it's a little bit too nice is probably the least scary and harmful thing. I think more labs should be releasing more unpolished, models that are maybe a little bit before their time. Make sure they're safe, make sure the real catastrophic dangers are tested for, but then go for it, put it into the hands of the people, especially maybe have more wider sort of range of testers. For all these tools, I'm signing up for being a beta tester. So, just maybe those people who are opting in, just give us the crazy models. Let us mess around with it and see what goes wrong. I think that's, at this point, a good idea. So let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you completely disagree? I am all ears. Well, check out this paper on the MIT and OpenAI about the emotional well-being and how these bots can manipulate us. That's coming maybe not next, but definitely I'll try to cover this in the next few weeks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.